I just want you guys to see how much damage my card sleeves have taken because I have spent the past 2 weeks non-stop trying to take our glorious Blitz Gigamobile Asturm to the next level, and I finally have done it. How's it going, card fighters, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel. As you can see, I'm currently in a new space. I promise you this is temporary. I will have my glorious backdrop soon once I take care of my living situation. But outside of that, I want to talk about some fantastic new support that Blitz Gigamobile Asturm has received and how it's changed the entire chemistry of this deck, and answer the question, is Astrum finally playable? Now, I made a couple of videos on Blitz Gigamobile Asturm since the introduction of the other quick start decks. I made 2 deck profiles on it, one trying the Shadow Army variation and one trying the base variation. I will say that the Shadow Army variation was the more popular variation, at least for me personally, to play for a while. However, with some new support being introduced for all of the quick start deck bosses in the former promos, as well as some guaranteed support coming in the next set of Divine Z, set 6, I took the time to go back and experiment with all of them and see what they're doing right now, and the new Astrum is actually pretty insane. Now, after 2 weeks of playing, I am ready to showcase you guys my current take on Astrum for the current format of Cardfight, Vanguard, Divine Z prior to moving into next year at the time making this video. And while you guys are watching this, if you enjoy seeing content like this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you guys are always getting my newest videos coming out. Now, to take a quick look at Astrum, we're going to start with the ride line before we can go into all the stuff for the deck. And there's a lot of new things in here that we have to talk about. So with the ride line of Astrum, it has pretty much stayed the same. You are playing the Blitz cards as well as the ride line it came with. Base Stand and Megalio both have the same ability where once you ride into the other copy of the other one, you get to search your deck out for a copy of Supplier Armor Vehicle Preciosa and add that to your hand. This is actually going to be really important because we do play a new card deck that does care about what set orders we have in our hand, besides the obvious need for playing Preciosa to get it going. Now, Astrum, obviously, as always, is going to be staying the same with this deck. The beauty of this card and the strength of it is the fact that, like all of its quick start deck companions, you are able to use its effect to search out your Persona Ride copy of this deck, and then also the Energy Blast gives you guaranteed 4 attacks with additional power on both. This is always one of Astrum's strong points and why, generically speaking, it has been so good, because it guarantees you Persona Ride on your turn 4 or more, as well as gives you 4 attacks while powering up the units and itself during the battle phase. Astrum is one of the few Vanguards that can power itself up to a very good number with its own effects, and its restanding ability to give you more attacks, making this card more lethal and threatening against your opponent. Now, in its first wave of support, we received our Swingby Dragon. Now, Swingby Dragon was one of the first wave of support cards to come out for Astrum. It gave you the ability to counterblast 1 to draw a card. Despite this deck being CB heavy, sometimes additional draw might help you, but really you played this card because you needed the additional attack for it. Now, once you hit turn 4 or more, you'll have more copies of Astrum in the Soul, which you can Soul Blast out to use Astrum's effect, as well as this card to guarantee you 5 attacks in a turn. This is huge for Astrum as it gave the deck more offensive pressure in the late game, and since you already guaranteed Persona Ride on your turn 4 or more, this unit would always be at a match number on top of the 2k it gave itself when you're doing your multi-attack plays with boosters and other card effects. Now, Swingby Dragon, because the new Vivacious girl will be a very important piece to have in the deck, so it is a mandatory for now before we discuss the promo. And to make sure that we can see this, one of the key cards I've decided to add to the deck is the brand new Gallant Mechanical Agility, Valtrossa and Liel. This unit is one of the special units that came out and is a hybrid between Keter and Brant Gates. Being able to have the ability to recycle one of your set orders or your normal units, you can then convert that into a unit onto the board or add an order to your hand from a top 5 check for 1 counterblast. This is huge because naturally we're going to be searching out our Astrums multiple times, so recycling those is important. We have some orders we might want to put back into the deck in case we are burning through them too fast, or if we want to search them out later. That works, as well as finding Preciosos in the early game to add more of them to our hand via for other card effects. It's actually been really important because one of the key things about this deck now with the new promo support as well as needing Swingby Dragon is the fact that Astrum card advantage has never been the best, so getting a form of superior call is actually pretty good in this deck. You can then get more units onto the board, take full advantage of the 4 attacks that you're going to be doing every single turn, and then obviously 5 or more depending on how late the game goes. It's very important that Astrum can actually maintain a board and at least do 4 attacks in a turn or more, because that's how this deck is going to be able to maintain its aggression and its tempo to keep with the other decks when this deck pops off in the late game. We have our Habitable Zone. You can't really play any of the Energy Blast stuff that's less than 2. Anything EB2 or less you can play in the deck. Anything EB3 or more is still going to be difficult to play despite the new promo. So Habitable Zone being able to get us a double Preciosa setup or a double set order setup, as well as draws cards and recycle out throughout the game is actually pretty important because your soul really only goes to like 1 or 2 cards in this deck, so therefore you were able to convert your soul into value thanks to Habitable Zone and its ability. I put Combine Rusher in here because again, Astrum needs a board now. Like, it's really important that Astrum can actually get 4 attacks and then maximize them throughout the entirety of the game. Also, Combine Rusher is a fantastic early game piece because you can just throw them onto the board and then convert them into value later. I feel like that was really important for Astrum, and one of the reasons why I like my Shadow Army build compared to this, because that build gave you something to do in the early game compared to my base version of Astrum that couldn't. So now that we have Combine Rusher into the deck, we can make space for it, and its late game power ability, it gives us some fodder to throw in the early game to actually fight back against our opponents in case the game gets way too hectic. Now, one of my brand new favorite cards for Astrum is 3 copies of the Ravenous Monster Maruman. Now Maruman, if you guys don't know who that is a set 2 unit with the ability to discard a card from your hand that is a set order and countercharge 1. You guys might be wondering, you have Progress Globe Dragon, more Bulbul Mines, you have so many other ways to countercharge. Why did you put Maruman into this deck? Well, first off, let's talk about the main problem with all those counterchargers. All of those counterchargers that Branke has access to all happen during the battle phase outside of 2. Maruman and the grade 2 unit that lets you countercharge 1 if you put a set order in from your hand. Now, here's the problem with that grade 2. I don't like it. I have never liked that grade 2 ever since people started putting it in their Astrum deck. The main reason why people put it in the Astrum deck is because all of Astrum's support and its cool effects happen during the main phase. So if you don't have the CB available during the main phase to use your skills, you would have to use your battle phase countercharge to give you the CB to use those skills during your next turn, or you would have to obviously take a bunch of damage in the early game, which right now you do not want to do because of how fast every deck is. Since my best effects happen during the main phase, but I have a bunch of battle phase counterchargers, I had to find a way to mitigate that issue. Now, I obviously didn't like that grade 2, and I was looking for other countercharges that happen during the main phase, but all of them are either archetype locked, meaning they need to be within a certain archetype or use with a certain Vanguard, or they have extensive setup that just does not work for this deck. Now, then there was Maruman, and Maruman was the answer that I needed. It is a grade 1 unit that stays on the board as a booster or an attacker, whatever I might need in the early game, and then it has an act ability so I can choose to use it or not to discard one of my set orders and get some countercharge going. This is actually really huge for Astrum because thanks to the new promo, which we'll discuss, and all the recycling that we have in the deck thanks to Lyale as well as Habitable Zone, we are able to convert those discarded set orders into some sort of value later on, and Maruman can use them in the early game when we need those counters to get those effects going to get this deck finally working. Thanks to Maruman, all those Preciosas that I can't play at once, even with the new promo, can now be converted into main phase countercharge value so I can take advantage of all of my effects. I can use Astrum, Lyale, set up Preciosa, and maybe even a 4th Counterblast skill all in the same turn. Now, realistically speaking, this isn't something that's going to happen very often, but having access to 3 Counterblast abilities in your first grade 3 turn is huge for Astrum because you're going to be using its effect, you're going to be using support, as well as you may or may not be sending an order Preciosa with the Counterblast cost despite the new promo. However, this deck does need more countercharging, so I still am playing 2 copies of Bulbul Mine. Bulbul Mine is still important, obviously you need the soul and the countercharge for it, but I have a countercharge I can use any choice that I want, and I have a battle phase countercharger, so I feel like this was fine. The Progress Globe Dragon, which is the Astrum support card, lets you countercharge by recycling Astrum. That works too. I just chose Bulbul Mine because Bulbul Mine outside of Maruman is the only other one that you can use in the early game. The Astrum support, you have to discard an Astrum to get it going, and I think that's when something restands as well. So you can't even get that countercharge in the early game, so therefore Bulbul Mine just ended up taking the slot, because outside of the new countercharges I put in the deck, this is the only one that I can use in the early game to make sure that I can still maintain my CB value while keeping my damage low. And now the MVP of the deck, and the reason why we were talking about Astrum today, the brand new Vivacious girl. Now let's go over her effects real quick. So she has 2 effects. The first one, all the quick start promos share. It is when you ride into the grade 3 unit of the same name, which is in this case be Astrum, you may Soul Blast 1 and then call this card to rearguard circle if you do not have a unit with the same name as this card. If you call it this way, you get to energy charge 1. The secondary skill, which is the most important of this card, is at the end of the battle that a boosted unit with Swingby in its card name, put this unit into the soul, choose up to one armor supply vehicle, Preciosa, from your hand or drop, and put it into the order zone. Choose one of your units and it gains power plus 2,000 to the end of the turn for each set order in your order zone, and if you put a card from hand, draw a card. Now, Vivacious Girl obviously is insane for this deck. It's a body onto the board, gives you an energy charge of 1, and then also it lets you convert those Preciosas from your hand or your drop zone into some value at any period in the game, and you can avoid paying that cost, which is fantastic for the deck because the CB cost of your Preciosas was one of the main reasons on why Astrum was so bad to play prior, but thanks to Vivacious Girl, we can now avoid using the cost of that card and converting all those Preciosas that we've been throwing away or that we haven't gotten the chance to play in the turn either into draw value or just get them active right away and give some power to something on our board. Now, Vivacious Girl, you will probably use her effect 2 to 3 times in a match. You will obviously, depending on how many Swingbys that you have on the board, and if you have more Vivacious Girls in your hand, you can set up multiple Preciosas, get multiple Preciosas going. This doubles the power of Astrum as well as the boosting unit 10th fold. And with the new cards we're playing in the deck, such as Combine Rusher, Marumon, as well as sticking with the Habitable Zone and the other set order combo, the power in this deck has been a lot better, as well as consistency of this, because thanks to Vivacious Girl, we now have one additional counterblast to work with, and that CB is huge because of how strong the generic support is for Brandgate. Now, for triggers for Astrum, it's pretty much stayed the same way. You're playing 8 crit, 3 draw, 4 heal, 1 of the Brandgate OT. I don't feel the need to experiment with the over triggers. I think that Elder Breath is strong enough as is. I think that if anything, you could play the blue or the red OT. If you want to put in room for an additional draw trigger, you play the blue OT. If you want extra pressure, you can go ahead and play the red OT. But I think that the pressure compared to additional attack versus Elder Breath doubling up your power, it is insane. And then obviously, depending on your attack patterns and how you choose to attack with Astrum, you will get full value of this card turn 3 and above compared to the first turn when your numbers are a little bit lower and a damage trigger can ruin your day. I have seen some people play fronts in Astrum. I disagree. I think that with how fast everything is and the fact that you don't really set up a board that you care about in the early game, I feel like fronts are not needed and your numbers are better anyway because of the new stuff. I think that draws are more important now. Defensively speaking, I'd rather hit a draw than a front, so that's why I'm just at draws and I chose not to experiment with fronts at all. But yeah, the trigger lineup is pretty generic. Nothing changes in here from anything that you have. If anything, you could take out one of the generic crits to put another copy of a draw trigger if you want. You're guaranteed 4 or 5 attacks turn 4 and onwards, so you always will have the pressure from that guaranteed Persona Ride. Your numbers are good in this deck. You know, numbers haven't been a problem with Astrum. It's just been about consistency and resources that have really held this deck back. So quickly to go over the orders, I am playing 4 copies of Preciosa. I think that being able to search out multiple copies of Preciosa as well as guarantee the fact that you can get them to your hand and, you know, put them back to the deck, recycle them is actually important because you do want to make sure that you can set up your Preciosas from your hand, but also have enough copies of dead set orders in your hand to use for Marumon to get the additional counter charges to activate other card effects that you want later on. And then, because I am playing Habitable Zone, I feel like if you play Habitable Zone, you should make an effort to put in a copy of Refablishment Dock. It is a set order that lets you draw a card and gives all your grade 2 units boost. And in this variation of Astrum, I'm playing way more generic grade 2s than I am in my prior variation. Lyell is new in the deck, and you know, she can be a booster, so can Habitable Zone. And then this way you can leave Combine Rusher and Swingby Dragon in the front to just do their own things, or at least convert all of your cards in hand into something offensive to make sure that you maintain pressure with this deck. And this brings us on my final thoughts towards Astrum. Here is the build for it, as well as the deck code, which I will leave in the link in the description below. This is my current take on Astrum right now for the current format of Cardfight, Vanguard, Divine Z prior to the new season. I think that this variation of Astrum, from my experience and all the play testing that I've done, I've like damaged the hell out of my Yu-Gi-Oh sleeves. I'm so sad about that. But with all this playtesting I've done, this version is much faster, much more consistent, and most importantly, a lot better in terms of resource management. That Marumon puts in so much work for this deck. It is such an underrated unit for Astrum, and I really do think that people need to stop sleeping on it because it really does help take this deck to the next level. In terms of being a good booster, a good unit in the early game, as well as being a countercharger that you have access to at any time, it has been a very underrated resource piece for Brandgate for a long time, but in this deck, it finally has a home. Outside of that, all of the other stuff is to be expected for Astrum, the Preciosas, the boosters, the attack power, the multi-attacks. Everything is looking good for this deck in the future, and I can't wait to see how the new support in the next set of Cardfight Vanguard Divine Z will take this deck to the next level. With that being said, Card Fighters, I'll catch you later. It's Prime Vanguard signing out. Peace.